The afternoon sun over Seattle cast long shadows across the worn floorboards of the Daily Grind, a cafe that had seen better decades. The air smelled of burnt espresso and the faint, sweet perfume of old paperbacks stacked haphazardly in a corner. Among the clatter of mismatched cups and the low murmur of conversations sat a woman who looked, by all accounts, utterly unremarkable. Her name was Sarah Jenkins, and to anyone glancing her way, she was invisible. She was 42, with a face that blended into the taupe-colored Walson-styled brown hair pulled into a loose knot, a faded olive-green cardigan to sizes too big, and reading glasses perched on her nose. She cradled a lukewarm chamomile tea and appeared deeply engrossed in a thick paperback titled The Pacific War. Her shoulders were slightly hunched, her posture that of someone who had spent a lifetime apologizing for taking up space. She was the picture of a weary, middle-aged woman seeking a quiet hour away from a mundane life. To men at a corner table, however, saw her differently. They saw not a person, but a transaction. Marcus, with a sharp, hungry face and a designer watch that was likely stolen, nudged his partner, a heavier, duller man named Leo. He tilted his head toward Sarah. See her. 10 minutes. Wallet's in that oversized canvas bag on the floor. She's not even looking at it. Probably has the social awareness of a goldfish. Leo grunted in agreement. To them, Sarah was the perfect mark, isolated, distracted, physically slight, and radiating an aura of timidity. They had run this play a dozen times in this very neighborhood. One would create a commotion, the other would lift the bag. Easy, clean, they never expected a fight. People like Sarah froze. What Marcus and Leo could not possibly see were the ghosts sitting with Sarah at her table. They couldn't see the way her fingers unconsciously traced the outline of a scar hidden beneath the sleeve of her cardigan, a scar from a shard of an IED that had ripped through a compound in Fallujah 15 years ago. They couldn't see the muscle memory coiled in her calves, ready to spring, or the way her ears never fully relaxed, always sifting through the ambient noise for anomalies. Sarah was not a retired librarian or a lonely divorcee. She was a former United States Navy SEAL, one of the first women to be fully integrated into a special operations team after a decade of clandestine service. She had spent years in places where a wrong glance meant a bullet, where she had learned to kill a man with a ballpoint pen, and where she had carried a wounded teammate for 3 miles under sniper fire. The cafe was her sanctuary, a place where she tried to forget the feel of sand in her teeth and the sound of half a dozen languages screaming for mercy. She came here to pretend she was normal, to dissolve into the harmless shell she had carefully constructed. Marcus made his move. He stood up, deliberately knocking a full cup of coffee off the counter near the register. The crash was loud, theatrical. The barista yelped. Heads turned. A wave of chatter died down as people focused on the puddle of dark liquid and the man loudly, profanely apologizing. It was textbook distraction. In that 2-second window of collective attention shifting, Leo slid from his chair with a grunt, his thick fingers reaching under Sarah's table for the canvas bag. He was fast for his size, his movements practiced. He already felt the weight of the bag strap, his mind calculating the pawn value of the cheap laptop inside, but Leo had made a critical error. He had watched Sarah's eyes. In the chaos, her head had turned toward the spilled coffee, exactly as every other head in the room had. He thought her attention was gone. He was wrong. Sarah's eyes had moved, but her awareness, her true awareness, had not. The moment the cup hit the floor, her brain had instantly cataloged 3 things: the direction of the sound, the number of people who moved toward the noise, and the one person who moved away from it, Leo, while her face presented a mask of mild, middle-aged confusion. Her peripheral vision had locked onto his trajectory. She saw his hand disappear beneath the table. She felt the faintest tug on the strap of her bag, which was looped around her right ankle, a habit born from years of keeping her gear close in hostile territory. The next 15 seconds would be a symphony of controlled violence. Leo's fingers closed on the bag's handle. He pulled. The bag did not move. He pulled harder, a flicker of confusion crossing his face. Sarah had not frozen. She had simply pressed her foot down on the strap, anchoring it to the floor as if it were bolted to concrete. In the same fluid motion, without a single sharp inhalation or a widening of her eyes, she removed her reading glasses and placed them on the table. She unfolded herself from the chair. It was not a tired woman standing up. It was a spring-releasing. Leo looked up, startled. He saw the woman from the table looming over him, but the face was different. The softness was gone. The eyes behind the now absent glasses were flat, cold, and utterly focused a predator's gaze that had assessed and dismissed his threat level in a fraction of a heartbeat. "Wrong table," Sarah said. Her voice was quiet, calm, and carried an authority that made Leo's blood run cold. Before he could react, her right hand shot out, not in a slap or a punch, but in a precise, open-palmed strike to the radial nerve on the outside of his forearm. The effect was instantaneous and silent. Leo's entire hand went numb, his fingers splaying open as if zapped by a live wire. The bag dropped. A choked gasp escaped his lips, but no one heard it over the commotion at the counter. Sarah did not pause. In the same motion, she stepped forward, her left hand gripping the back of Leo's thick neck. It was not a gentle hold. Her thumb and middle finger found the pressure points at the base of his skull, where the trapezius muscle meets the cervical spine. A seal's control hold. She applied just enough pressure to send a sickening wave of vertigo through him, forcing his head down and his body to tilt off balance. Then she swept his feet. It was a simple foot sweep, technique over power. Leo's legs flew out from under him, and he hit the floor with a thud that vibrated through the cafe's floorboards. He was on his back, staring up at the water-stained ceiling, his nervous system screaming contradictory signals. He was not unconscious, but he was completely, utterly incapacitated, his mind struggling to process the speed and clinical efficiency of what had just happened. The entire exchange had taken 5 seconds. Across the room, Marcus had finished his performance. He turned, expecting to see Leo already out the door with the bag. Instead, he saw his partner flat on his back, with the mousy woman standing over him, one foot placed gently on Leo's chest to keep him pinned. The cafe had gone silent. Every pair of eyes was now fixed on Marcus. He panicked. Years of petty criminal instinct told him to run. But his legs betrayed him. He took one step toward the exit, and Sarah's voice cut through the silence like a blade. "Don't," one word. It was not loud, but it was sharp enough to stop him mid-stride. He looked into her eyes, and what he saw there made his bowels loosen. It was not anger. It was absolute, terrifying certainty. He knew, with the primal clarity of prey, that if he took another step, the distance between them would disappear in an instant, and he would be on the floor next to his partner, likely with a broken bone or two. He did not move. The barista, a young man with a septum piercing, had his phone out, already dialing 911. Marcus raised his hand slowly, a gesture of surrender as old as time. Sarah held his gaze for a long, silent moment, then nodded once, sharply. She removed her foot from Leo's chest and stepped back, resuming a neutral stance, her hands hanging loosely at her sides. The ferocity was gone as quickly as it had appeared, like a storm cloud passing. She bent down, picked up her canvas bag, and slung it over her shoulder. She retrieved her reading glasses, her paperback book, and her cup of now cold tea. She walked calmly back to the counter, placed a $10 bill down as a tip, and said to the stunned barista, "I'll wait outside for the police. I can give a statement." The sound of sirens grew closer. Marcus stood frozen by the door, a statue of regret. Leo moaned softly on the floor, cradling his numb arm. The other customers stared in a collective daze, unable to reconcile the violent poetry they had just witnessed with the ordinary woman now sipping the last of her tea on the sidewalk. A young mother clutching her toddler whispered to her husband, "Did you see her face? It changed. She became someone else." Her husband, a former Marine who had done a tour in Iraq, nodded slowly, his eyes wide. "I know that look," he said. "That's not a civilian. That's someone who has taken a life." He looked at the woman on the sidewalk, and a deep, involuntary respect settled over him. He had just watched a ghost from a battlefield walk into a coffee shop and remind everyone what a human body was truly capable of. When the Seattle police arrived 3 minutes later, they found a scene that defied their daily expectations. Two disheveled men, one sitting on the floor, leaning against a table, the other standing with his hands trembling at his sides, and a dozen starry-eyed witnesses, all pointing toward a 40-something woman in an olive cardigan who was calmly petting a stray cat that had wandered onto the cafe's patio. Officer Raymond Delgado, a 20-year veteran of the force, had seen it all: bar fights, domestic disputes, gang shootings. He had never seen a middle-aged woman single-handedly immobilized to grown men without breaking a sweat and then go back to reading a history book. He approached her with a carefully neutral expression. "Ma'am," he said, flipping open his notepad. "I'm Officer Delgado. Can you tell me what happened here?" Sarah looked up from the cat, her eyes once again soft behind her reading glasses. She offered a small, almost apologetic smile. "Of course, officer. Those two gentlemen attempted to steal my bag. I prevented them from doing so. They are not seriously injured, though the larger one might have a mild case of radial nerve palsy for an hour or so. I recommend he avoids heavy lifting until the tingling stops." Delgado blinked. "You prevented them? How exactly?" Before Sarah could answer, 3 customers burst out of the cafe, tripping over each other to be heard. "She was like a ninja," shouted the young barista. "She barely moved. He just fell." A woman in yoga pants added, "It was the most terrifying and beautiful thing I've ever seen." "She didn't even raise her voice," another man, older, with a veteran's cap, simply said. "She's a pro, officer. A real pro. I've seen those moves before. That's hand-to-hand combat training, military grade." Delgado looked back at Sarah. The pieces were clicking into place. Her posture was too straight, her hands too still. The way she had positioned herself with the wall at her back and a clear view of both exits. The clinical language. "Military?" he asked quietly. Sarah hesitated. The question opened a door she usually kept locked, bolted, and hidden behind a bookshelf. She had spent 3 years since her medical discharge trying to bury the person she had been. The Navy had given her a medal for valor, a check for her injuries, and a pamphlet on PTSD. They had not given her a manual on how to sit in a coffee shop without wanting to check the roof for snipers. She had chosen the cafe precisely because it was small, had only one entrance besides the fire exit, and the windows were frosted enough to prevent a clear shot from outside. She did this unconsciously, every single time. It was not paranoia. It was a habit as ingrained as breathing. And now, standing on the sidewalk, that hidden world was about to collide with her carefully crafted present. "I was in the Navy," she said finally. Then, after a pause, she added, "Naval Special Warfare. I was medically retired 3 years ago." Delgado stopped writing. Naval Special Warfare. That was the official term for the SEALs. He looked at her cardigan, her messy bun, her tea. He had heard rumors about the experimental integration programs, the women who had passed the same hellish training as the men who had served in the same shadows. He had never met one. And now he was arresting a petty thief who had been flattened by one. He almost laughed. "Ma'am," he said, "I'm going to need your full name for the report. And your ID." Sarah pulled a worn leather wallet from her bag and handed him a driver's license. The name read Sarah J. Jenkins. No medals, no ranks, no ghosts. Delgado copied the information, then handed it back. "I'm going to take their statements, but from what I see and what the witnesses are saying, this is a clear case of attempted theft and assault on their part. You acted in defense of your property and yourself. I don't anticipate any charges against you." He paused. "But I am going to need to know if you want to press charges against them." Sarah looked at Marcus, who was now weeping quietly against a parking meter, and Leo, who was being helped to his feet by another officer, his face a mask of bewilderment. She felt a wave of exhaustion, not from the physical effort that had been nothing less than a warm-up drill but from the exposure. They had seen her. They had seen the operator beneath the skin. "Yes," she said quietly, "I will press charges. They need to understand that the world is not full of easy targets. Some of us are just not what we look like." The police took the 2 men away, Marcus still weeping, Leo still holding his numb arm. The crowd on the sidewalk slowly dispersed, whispering and glancing back at Sarah as if she were a superhero in civilian clothes. She hated that. She was not a superhero. She was a broken instrument that had been tuned for violence and then told to play soft music. She walked back into the cafe to retrieve her book, which she had left on the table. The barista offered her a free latte, which she politely declined. He asked, "Can I get you anything else? A pastry, a sandwich?" "No, thank you," Sarah said. "Just the check for my tea." She paid, left another tip, and walked out into the gray Seattle afternoon. The cat from the patio followed her for half a block, then lost interest and trotted off to chase a pigeon. Sarah walked 10 blocks to her small apartment, a ground-floor unit she had chosen because it had reinforced locks and a direct line of sight to the street. She unlocked 3 deadbolts, stepped inside, and closed the door. She leaned against it for a long moment, her forehead pressed to the cool wood. The adrenaline was finally ebbing, leaving behind a familiar hollow ache in her joints, the legacy of a bad knee, and a titanium rod in her left forearm. She had lied to the officer about the thumb drive. The bag had not contained a cheap laptop. It had contained a single encrypted thumb drive, the last remnant of her service, a collection of after-action reports, photographs of men who did not come home, and a voice memo from her last mission. It was the only thing she truly could not lose. That night, she sat on her worn couch, the book unopened on her lap. She stared at the television, which she had turned on for noise, but she saw none of it. Her mind was replaying the 15 seconds in the cafe, frame by frame, analyzing her technique. The radial strike had been perfect. The foot sweep had been clean. The neck hold had been exactly pressure, not pain. She had shown restraint. She had not followed through with the knee to the sternum that her muscle memory had primed her to deliver. She had not broken the larger man's wrist when he grabbed her bag. She had not killed anyone. In her world, that was a victory. The next morning, she woke at 05:00, as she always did, with no need for an alarm. She went through her morning routine, stretches, a cold shower, a breakfast of oatmeal and black coffee. She checked her email on a laptop that was connected to the internet through 3 different VPNs, and there it was. A message from a name she had not seen in 2 years. It was from Master Chief Petty Officer James Hawk Hawkins, her former team leader. The subject line was simply, "The Daily Grind." She opened it. The message was short. Saw the police blotter. Heard you took down 2 dirtbags with your left hand while holding tea in your right. That's my girl. Proud of you. Stop hiding. The world still needs what you can do. Call me. Sarah closed the laptop. She looked at her reflection in the dark screen, the tired eyes, the mousy hair, the civilian clothes. For the first time in 3 years, she did not see a woman hiding from her past. She saw a seal, and for the first time, that thought did not bring a wave of shame or pain. It brought a small, dangerous flicker of something else, purpose. She picked up her phone, scrolled to Hawk's number, and pressed call before she could change her mind. He answered on the first ring. "Took you long enough, Jenkins," he said. She smiled, a real smile that reached her eyes. "I know, Hawk, I know." She looked out her window at the gray Seattle street, where an ordinary day was beginning. Somewhere out there, she thought, there was another Marcus and Leo, and somewhere, there was another woman in a cardigan, pretending to be invisible. Sarah decided, in that moment, that she was done pretending. The cafe had been a wake-up call. She was not an easy target, and she was not done fighting. She was just getting started.